Global Landscapes Forum 2017 in Bonn. It's the first time that the GLF takes place in Bonn, and I guess the next year we'll see more of GLF. So I would like to start with Robert Nazi. He is Director General at the Center of International Forestry Research. He is the host. And next to Mr. Nazi, there is Her Excellency Amina Gurib Fakim, the President of the Republic of Mauritius. And on the left side, Mrs. Barbara Hendricks. She is the Federal Minister for Environment. Next to Mrs. Hendricks, Dr. Stefan Schmitz. He is the Commissioner for the Special Initiative One World No Hunger of the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. And we have also on the floor Eric Solheim on the right side of the floor, Executive Director of UN Environment Program, and Mrs. Karin Kemper. She is Senior Director of the Environment and Natural Resources Global Practice at the World Bank. Thank you very much. And Mr. Nazi, would you like to start?
Yes. I'm not sure I would like to start. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm much more comfortable talking about science than trying to facilitate a panel or a press conference. But I think we are all gathered here because it matters, and I always say the forest matters, but in fact a lot of the things that beyond forest, including landscape, seascape, cityscapes matter, and we are all here together. And because we believe that we need to have this place where we can have a frank, if not difficult, dialogue. As you know, if you have listened to what Selina was saying, I think it's true. I mean, so we are going to have some uncomfortable moments. It's not always easy to speak the truth or to go beyond the politically correct. I do believe that politically correctness will kill us. But I think that's what we offer with the Global Landscape Forum, and thanks to the support from Germany through their funding, but for a long time through their technical support, the support to the UN Environment, the World Bank, the GLF, and everybody else. I mean, we have had more than 2,000 organizations involved in the previous and the whole Global Landscape Forum history, and we hope to have more. And this is really the beginning of a new era for the Global Landscape Forum, where most of the people only see the tip of the iceberg, the 10% that is above the water, which is the big event that you see now. But what we want to do is develop the 90% that is below the water, which is about the creation of knowledge, the transformational change in terms of the way we are managing landscape, and we are understanding our relationship with these important concepts, and also how we are going to provide capacity development, how we are going to provide learning area for the people interested in landscape, and at the same time provide evidence-based, science-based evidence in terms of how we can sustainably manage landscape and how we can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goal. I think we should stop seeing natural resources, indigenous people, or forest as a problem. We should see them as a solution. Because if we only see them as a problem, then we'll never reach a solution. That's all I have to say. I mean, I'm very much committed to this, looking from the scientific perspective or the capacity development. And that's why we have a very strong partner in the implementation side and the policy side. And I think I will stop it here.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, would you like to take over?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, again, I'd like to thank the German government for hosting us, and, of course, all the partners on board for having given me this space to address this forum. As I mentioned this morning in my speech, I bring in the African voice, if I may say, of course. Then, of course, what I said, I think, resonates with other parts of the world. Coming in from the African perspective, I think if you look at it globally, landscape matters. Landscape matters for many reasons. But I think if you look at the threats, and I think as Ms. Nassi has just said, I think in all these threats we also see opportunities. Now the threats is that the African continent is going to be impacted more. Again, I have to be political here and say that Africa has hardly contributed to any of the greenhouse gases, and yet the impact on the continent is going to be so much so that we are seeing the symptoms already. We are seeing degradation of landscape. This, of course, are directly related to migration. And I think, as the young lady has just said, it is not a matter of choice that people move. It is because of the situation on the ground. So addressing landscape issues, as I said again this morning, is not optional. It's existential. It's existential for the very survival of people. And when I bring it down now to a smaller country where I come from, which is an island state, we see that we are surrounded with oceans, and we look at the health of the oceans, we find that, again, the challenges are there. And again, people don't take oceans very seriously. People take it as a dumping ground. It is not a dumping ground. It has the health of the oceans matter. And as I said, the nutrition of people, the livelihoods of people, of course, living in these islands, of course, matter a great deal on the health of the oceans. And we all know the impacts that the climate change will have, is already having, in terms of coral bleaching, in terms of acidity. And every increase in temperature rise will mean, of course, that these very oceans will not be able to absorb greenhouse gases. So again, this is something we are not addressing in terms of the rising temperature of the oceans. And acidification, of course, is also seeing, and we see what happened in Australia and the coral reef, the bleaching. And this also impacts, of course, on the livelihoods of people. So these are issues that we need to be addressing. And Mauritius, unfortunately, we are 13th on the risk reports in terms of impact of climate change. So the issue of preparedness, the issue of adaptation are very much of concern to us. And of course, the issue of indigenous peoples and the issue of women, the issue of communities, because in Africa, women and indigenous people are custodian of a lot of the information. And unfortunately, in Africa, the transmission has been oral. We have not had the culture of documenting. And I am a firm believer of traditional knowledge as helping to develop a third way between the hard sciences, traditions, and of course, with whatever information that we should be able to garner and gather from indigenous people, they would help us in terms of adaptation to climate change. So the issue here is, again, I'll bring in the word, is existential. So our survival needs on a very sustained landscape approach, and I'm very pleased to see here in this forum the gathering of so many people from various walks of life who are here to discuss. But again, discussing is one thing, but implementation and scalability will be the other issue. So this is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Solheim, would you like to take the next part?
Thank you. Yes. Let me first thank Germany for setting up this forum here in Bonn. I understand Germany really want to make Bonn the landscape capital of the world. And I think that's a brilliant idea. Please do. And it's also fitting to do it in one of the really beautiful landscapes of the planet, which is the Rhine Valley or the city of Bonn. So you have really picked a beautiful place to set up the world capital of landscapes. Understand that we will come back on a yearly basis, and we will really achieve a lot out of Bonn. So thanks for that, and it's a super idea, even if landscapes are of course in Mauritius and everywhere else on planet Earth. And obviously, landscapes is a no-brainer in the sense that there are very few areas where the same policies can achieve so many good results at the same time. Providing for climate, 1/3 of what we need to do for climate can be achieved through good landscapes policies. Protecting the biodiversity and all the iconic species which are diminishing on planet, the rhinos, the elephants, all those big, fantastic animals which are unfortunately on the decrease. I mean, there are many success stories also on protecting animals. I mean, the Chinese are doing well on pandas. The Russians and Indians surprisingly doing well on tigers, which are very difficult. Rwandans are doing good on gorillas. So there are success stories, but overall we need to do much better on protecting the beauty of this planet. And while many people do not know, landscapes and deforestation are among the big also polluters of the planet. Huge pollution is coming from burning of forest, for instance. So the same good policies are good for climate, good for biodiversity, and good for pollution at the same time. So it's a no-brainer really contemplating how we can do it. And we need more resources. We spend very limited part of our environment and climate resources, maybe a couple of percent on landscapes, much bigger money in other areas. Then a couple of other thoughts. We need to bring in the private sector, and we need to think much bigger. We will not be able to succeed just with aid money and small projects here and there. Only with thinking much bigger we can succeed. That's why we have now brought in BNP Paribas, Europe's biggest or second biggest bank. It's provided $10 billion for this. There is no lack of money. What's the lack of is our ability to translate that money into projects on the ground which are workable. So bringing together the people with the projects and programs with the big banks and financial institutions is the trick. We have started this. We have set it up in Indonesia and India. We want this to be much broader. We want to bring many more financial institutions into it. But we cannot do with just the small projects and small programs. NGOs, even government aid agencies, are doing a lot of good. But if we want to really resolve the problems, we will need the big money, which is only one place. That's the private sector. Banks, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, others, they must be mobilized. Last, which I think is very good at this conference, is the fact that we have brought an Indian guru, Sadhguru. But of course, this is because we need to bring the spiritual dimension into this. The language of environmentalists have, frankly, for so long been so often so boring, so instrumental, so lack of really inspiring. We need a much more language of embracing the enormous, fantastic beauty of this planet, much more emotional, much more speaking about all our sisters and brothers in Asia, all the animals, all the plants which we need there, and we need this spiritual dimension. If you are not Hindu from India, just look up the Bible. First part of the Bible is how God is creating the planet. You see how beautiful it is. He's frankly very, very happy with himself, has created this fantastic beauty. And after 6 days, he takes a day of rest because he's so happy with what he has created. But let's get into a much more inspirational language, and I think we can get a lot of inspiration for this from these spiritual leaders.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Solheim. Landscapes and Germany, I guess the Minister for Environment will have to say something more about this point.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Please take your headsets. I will go on in German. Die Stärkung des Profils der UN-Stadt Bonn als das internationale Zentrum der globalen Klima-, Umwelt- und Entwicklungspolitik hat jetzt mit der Ansiedlung des Global Landscapes Forum, GLF abgekürzt, eine weitere Aufwertung erfahren. Und das ist auch durchaus international von Bedeutung. Deutschland und insbesondere mein Ministerium engagieren sich seit Jahren sowohl politisch als auch finanziell beim internationalen Waldschutz und beim Wiederaufbau von Wäldern und Landschaften. Die Unterstützung des GLF als bedeutende informelle Plattform, es ist ja keine staatliche Einrichtung, sondern es ist eine bedeutende informelle Plattform, diese Unterstützung sichert das bisherige Engagement ab und hilft auch, es weiterzuentwickeln. Böden, Wälder und landwirtschaftlich genutzte Flächen sind für die Minderung des Klimawandels die 3 großen grünen natürlichen Senkenoptionen von Treibhausgasen, die uns als natürliche Emissionspuffer zur Verfügung stehen. Das ist also in der Klimawissenschaft völlig unbestritten. Das sind eben die natürlichen Senken, die dazu beitragen, die schädlichen Klimagase sozusagen zu neutralisieren, also Böden, Wälder und landwirtschaftlich genutzte Flächen. Und die praktische Umsetzung des Landschaftsansatzes, wir nennen das Landscape Approach, unterstützt sowohl die Verhandlungen zum Klimaschutz als auch die zum Schutz der Biodiversität und zur Bekämpfung der Wüstenbildung. Also auch hier treffen wir uns dann wieder mit UN-Institutionen, die in Bonn auch angesiedelt sind. Es ist wichtig, das jetzige Momentum für eine klimaangepasste und nachhaltige Bewirtschaftung natürlicher Ressourcen zu erhalten. Wenn wir heute damit beginnen, diese 3 Bereiche in ihren Senkenleistungen auszubauen, dann können sie in 2050 den entscheidenden Unterschied in der Emissionsbilanz machen, um das 2-Grad-Ziel des Pariser Klimaschutzabkommens dann auch zu halten und zu erreichen. Wir müssen sie deshalb unbedingt auch erhalten, diese 3 natürlichen Senken. Die EU ist in der letzten Woche beschlossenen Instrument LULUCF auf gutem Weg, international die erste Partei zu werden, die sich klare und robuste Regeln zur Anrechnung der CO2-Einbindung sowie Emissionen von Wäldern und Böden setzt. Und das können wir miteinander durchaus auch verbinden. Das war auch innerhalb der Europäischen Union nicht unbestritten, aber in der vergangenen Woche ist eine Einigkeit darüber erzielt worden. Und das Global Landscape Forum bietet für ein praxisorientiertes, auch strukturiertes und integriertes Vorgehen dafür eine herausragende Plattform. Und wir werden das als Deutschland auch in der Zukunft auch finanziell unterstützen und haben natürlich auch die Ansiedlung hier unterstützt. Herzlichen Dank.
Ich gebe gleich weiter an Herrn Dr. Schmitz.
Vielen Dank. Das 21. Jahrhundert wird ja häufig auch als das Jahrhundert der Städte bezeichnet. Das ist auch im Grunde richtig. Die Verstädterung hat dramatische Ausmaße in einigen Teilen der Erde. Städte bieten riesige Chancen und ihre Probleme. Das ist alles gut und richtig. Dabei wird aber allzu leicht vergessen, welche große Bedeutung die ländlichen Räume für das Überleben der Menschheit haben. Im ländlichen Raum entscheidet sich die Zukunft der Menschheit. Ich glaube, das ist nicht übertrieben, das so zu sagen. Dort sind, wie die Ministerin schon sagte, die entscheidenden CO2-Senken. Da auch entscheidet sich, wie sich der Klimawandel entwickeln wird. Dort wird die Nahrungsproduktion gesichert werden müssen für eine wachsende Weltbevölkerung. Dort sind die Südwasserressourcen. Dort muss die Biodiversität erhalten werden. Dort wird auch der Standort der erneuerbaren Energien im Wesentlichen sein, ja, die letztlich dann das Ende oder über das Ende des fossilen Zeitalters hinaus die Menschheit versorgen müssen. Der ländliche Raum ist in vielen Teilen der Welt aber überhaupt nicht fit für diese Aufgabe. Im ländlichen Raum kommen sehr viele entscheidende Probleme zusammen. Nehmen wir einfach Armut und Hunger. 70% aller Armen und Hungernden auf der Welt leben im ländlichen Raum. In Afrika sind es sogar 75% der dortigen Bevölkerung. Arbeits- und Perspektivlosigkeit hat vor allem ein ländliches Gesicht, insbesondere unter jungen Menschen. In Afrika, jetzt mal als Beispiel, drängen bis zum Jahr 2030 zusätzlich 440 Millionen Menschen auf den Arbeitsmarkt. Die Mehrzahl von ihnen im ländlichen Raum, immer noch, bis weit in die zweite Hälfte dieses Jahrhunderts hinein. Das bedeutet jährlich mehr als 15 Millionen Menschen im ländlichen Raum, monatlich mehr als 1 Million Menschen, die dort in Afrika im ländlichen Raum neue Arbeit suchen. Auf der anderen Seite Bodendegradierung. Jedes Jahr gehen 10 Millionen Hektar fruchtbaren Bodens verloren. Produktives Land wird zu einem immer knapperen und umkämpften Gut. Der jährliche Verlust an Naturwald in den Tropen liegt etwa in der gleichen Größenordnung. Damit wird nicht nur der Klimawandel beschleunigt, sondern auch die lokalen Lebensbedingungen werden verschlechtert. Wenn Hunger, Arbeits- und Perspektivlosigkeit, Ausbeutung der Natur und Klimawandel zusammenkommen, wachsen Krisen und Konflikte. wachsen auch die Zahl der Kriegs-, Wirtschafts- und Umweltflüchtlinge. Das ist nicht Zukunftsmusik, das ist bereits heute so. Wenn es dem sogenannten entwickelten Norden, der entwickelten Welt nicht gelingt, die Probleme des globalen Südens mitzulösen, werden die Menschen des globalen Südens aufbrechen und ein sicheres und besseres Leben im globalen Norden suchen. Der ländliche Raum verdient daher eine deutlich größere politische Aufmerksamkeit. Nirgendwo sonst treffen die Bedürfnisse der heute lebenden Menschen so direkt auf die Notwendigkeit, das Überleben zukünftiger Generationen zu sichern, wie im ländlichen Raum. Das ist einfach das, was Nachhaltigkeit ausmacht. Der Begriff der Landschaft steht hier im Mittelpunkt dieser Konferenz. Landschaft ist eigentlich ein anderes Wort für alles hängt irgendwie mit allem zusammen oder zumindest vieles hängt mit vielem zusammen. Intakte Landschaften sind letztlich intakte ländliche Räume für Menschen und für das Überleben der Menschheit. Ein wesentlicher Punkt wird sein, und das ist auch ein Schwerpunkt der deutschen Entwicklungspolitik, insbesondere die Landwirtschaft in den ländlichen Räumen als Ausgangspunkt.
To strengthen agriculture in rural regions, because that is the starting point for development. It creates jobs, and we need to strengthen that. There are huge opportunities for creating jobs in rural regions, but at the same time, of course, productivity growth has to be made sustainable, because only if you can produce more on the same amount of land will we ensure that agriculture does not spread to previously untouched landscapes. Agriculture currently is the biggest driver of deforestation, and it is worldwide the biggest problem when it comes to the overexploitation of water resources and soil degradation. That has to stop. There is no question. We need sustainable agriculture. If we don't have that, the rural regions will not be able to be sustainable. And that is one of the priority areas that we pursue on behalf of the German government, beside all the different kinds of measures that we have in the area of rural resources. Thank you.
Mrs. Kemper from the World Bank.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. The World Bank has been a partner of the Global Landscapes Forum since its inception in 2013, and we are really very pleased that the forum has developed into such a freestanding event, and with many people being here in Bonn, but also many people online, which of course is also great for the climate. And we are also very, very happy to see that the German government is supporting landscapes as a topic and to bring landscapes here to Bonn and to give it a permanent home. In the World Bank, we have two twin goals, as we call them. One is to eliminate extreme poverty by the year 2030, and the other one is to help bring about shared prosperity, and to do both of these things in a sustainable manner. And that is why the World Bank is so strongly supportive of landscapes approaches, because we know that sustainable landscapes bring environmental sustainability, they bring economic growth, they bring jobs, they bring local energy, they bring water, and so on. So for us, sustainable landscapes is very much a part of leading to the World Bank achievement of its mission. As I said in my speech earlier, there's a number of things that we still need to do, and where I hope there will be discussions during the forum, and it's kind of very handily described in the 3 I's. One is information. There is a lot of information out there. You just need to look at the different sessions here, but we also need to package it in such a way that decision makers get access to that information, and that, for instance, ministers of finance and heads of state can use the information and to see the economic case, why it makes sense to invest in sustainable landscapes. The other one is we need innovation, further innovation on technology. We need to make it even easier to provide proof of sustainable management of landscapes, and we also need financial innovation, because we all know that we do need to bring in both public finance and private finance into development, and for that there is still a lot to do on the instrument side for financing, including very much for landscapes, and we now see both from very small scale private sector to larger scale private sector starting to engage in landscapes, and to do so in a sustainable manner, which of course is very important. And that takes me to the third thing, and that's incentives. We need to get away from bad incentives, which are the ones that drive deforestation and drive degradation, and to go to more positive incentives, and that is on the land tenure side. It's on shifting incentives towards production and sustainable production. And maybe as a last point, the World Bank, the one thing that we can do is we can help scale interventions. We work with countries through our IDA funds, which are for the poorest countries, and also fragile states where landscapes are especially important. We work through IBRD funds, and we work with bilateral partners such as the government of Germany and others. And we also work through, for instance, the GLF, and we can help scale interventions and help scale financing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you don't mind, I would like to give the journalist the opportunity for some questions, please. Yes, there's a micro available. Okay, we have a lady here. No. So, please sit down. Please, you're the next one.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I'm Sophie Edwards, a reporter with DevEx. A question for anyone and everyone who wants to answer. The first question, what about the wisdom of separating this out from the COP? You know, the fact that there are less people here than there maybe would have been had it still been attached to the COP. It would be great to just get some thoughts on that. And the second question is about accountability. We talked a lot about private sector participation. How can the GLF help promote constructive debate about how we hold groups like Unilever, for example, and Mars accountable when we have partnerships for, say, you know, tapping down on illegal logging?
Well, why not during the COP? I think because we took this decision or we took this gamble and saying that we don't want to be limited only to the climate change agenda. It's fundamentally, and again, here, maybe not politically correct, but I don't really care if there is 1,000 person or 1,500, or in Paris 3,000. I mean, sort of what matters is who is sitting in the room and who is listening to you outside. And we have now 6,000 people online from 114 countries, and I guess that's the future of this type of events. And maybe next year we will have less people in the room and more people online. So I guess that was a bet. I think we did okay, and John behind is smiling. It was not the case for the last 2 weeks. And I think that was the purpose. I mean, so we have an agenda that is broader than the climate change agenda. Not to say that the climate change agenda is not important. We continue to be linked to them and to collaborate with them. The second question about accountability, that's a very good one, and it's at the same time a tricky one, and especially when you're talking about landscape. Are you accountable if you are a pulp and paper company that is FSC certified, and then middle of it runs a river, and someone upstream of you is polluting the river, and the pollution goes downstream, affecting a community? Who is the one accountable? What is the role? This whole issue of connectivity and accountability and what are the level of accountability it's an important one. Not an easy one, but certainly one we should take into account in terms of measuring progress. That's the whole purpose. Where do we define that forest landscape restoration is achieved? How do you define that your product is a green product? How do you define your development is green development? It's sort of a matter of, ultimately, everybody is accountable, some more than others.
Okay.
Dieser Tage wird in der EU entschieden, wie viel
At the
Lebensmittel
moment,
im
decisions
Tank
are
in
being
Zukunft
taken in
verbrannt werden.
Brussels
Das hat ja
about
eine
how
große
much
Auswirkung
food
auf
is
die
to be
Entwicklung der Landschaften in
burned.
Europa
And
und vor
that
allen
has
Dingen
a
auch in
big
Asien und
impact
überall
on the
in der
development
Welt.
of
Wie
landscapes in
positionieren Sie
Europe,
sich da,
Asia,
Frau
and
Hendricks?
elsewhere. Ms. Hendricks, do you have anything to say about that?
Inge Altemeyer, Journalistin.
My name is Inge Altemeyer. I'm a journalist. We find it important that it's not just about burning food. This is about burning residual waste. And bioenergy, of course, is something that should be generated from residual waste. For instance, agricultural or farming residues, but also general waste, such as food waste from urban restaurants, which is being collected these days. So the phrasing that you've just been using, the burning of food, that is not really something that can truthfully be said anymore. That is correct, but of course it cannot be avoided that when you cook food, there is some sort of waste.
Yes, my name is Sebastian Krings from Agrar Europe. I have also a question for Ms. Hendricks regarding sustainability of the German agriculture. Do you have any concrete wishes for the sustainability of German agriculture, especially regarding integrated costs, like companies have to pay for the use of soil or air or the cleaning of water? Then weeks ago you have been fighting for the ban of glyphosate in the EU. Well, glyphosate is said, at least, to have a good effect on the save of climate gases. So don't you think it might be useful to use glyphosate in agriculture? And at least now there have been some compromises since glyphosate has been allowed again, at least for the ban in the garden use. Are you satisfied with the current situation of compromises regarding that topic?
Zunächst mal.
Well, first of all, it is not to be expected that German agriculture, the German agricultural industry, will, in the foreseeable future, be able to make a charge for the use of soil, air, or water over and above the costs that somebody will have to pay if they are connected to the public water supply, of course. They have to pay for that kind of water just as an urban resident would. Of course, a farm may have a well of its own, which is not something that city residents would have. Now, when it comes to switch over the German agricultural industry, I think the primary concern should be to work on the subsidies at the EU level, which is, if you like, the reverse of charging somebody because it's money that they get. These subsidies that are paid from Brussels, that's a system that needs to be switched over. It should not depend on the amount of land that somebody is farming. It should be paid for the kinds of services that a certain farm or operator provides. For instance, what do they do in order to protect soil, protect biodiversity, and so on? They should be rewarded for that. That is something that we will be debating over the next few years, because in the European Union, at the moment, they are starting to discuss the new funding period from 2021 onwards. And that will, of course, be a discussion that will apply to the 7-year multi-year financial plan, as is the custom in Brussels. So we will see a political debate in Brussels, but also in the German parliament, depending on how the government reorganizes itself. That is a debate that we will have. We need to talk about the new agricultural policy in the EU. As for your question on glyphosate, of course, the situation is this. The European Commission has recently decided to allow for the use of glyphosate for another 5 years in the European Union, as you very probably know, with the approval of my learned colleague, the Federal Agriculture Ministry, which of course was a decision that wasn't quite above board. But that does not mean that we are not in a position to curb the use of glyphosate. How does this work? The reapproval process has just commenced, I believe on the 16th of December, if I'm correctly informed. So within 3 months of the 16th of December, all those who want to place glyphosate on the market, that's the manufacturers of glyphosate-containing products, have to apply for a new approval by mid-March. They have to do so by submitting an application to the Federal Agency for Agriculture and Food. And that agency is under the auspices of the German Agriculture Minister. However, the environmental agency needs to give it approval to that as well, and the Federal Environment Ministry controls the Federal Environment Agency. So I know that my colleague, Mr. Schmidt, has announced that he would not like, the only thing that he wouldn't like to see is the use of glyphosate in private gardens. And he's called that the compromise, but that's not the compromise that we want. The reapproval process will give us a chance to engage in a compromise, and we fully plan to take things further here. Minister Schmidt, for instance, spoke about wanting to make it an obligation to notify the use of glyphosate just before the harvest. That's not enough. I think we absolutely should ban glyphosate. It is absolutely not necessary to apply pesticides to cereals just before the harvest. There are very different products that can be used for that, and so desiccation is absolutely not necessary. The use of desiccants was limited beforehand, but it wasn't controlled at the federal level. It's the federal states in Germany that controlled that. It wasn't a terribly well-controlled system. Everyone who's able to recognize desiccant, and that's an easy thing to do, can see whether the rules are being broken. So I think that we do have some leeway there. There is no compromise yet, so I wouldn't want to call it a compromise, but maybe it will come. Now, I know that you said that if you're saying that the glyphosate is good for the climate, well, that's information that's new to me. I am not very well informed on this, so I don't want to say anything about this just now. But glyphosate is an all-round herbicide that destroys all green crops. That much is clear. And so it is a major intervention in nature, because if we don't have any green crops, then insects and small animals have nothing to eat. And if you know that insects have nothing to eat, then birds have nothing to eat, and the whole food pyramid collapses. That is why my aim in regard to glyphosate products is to take them completely off the market at some point. Not necessarily by banning them straight away, 100%. Of course, we need to explore alternatives. There are some regions where, and some agricultural regions where glyphosate cannot be banned immediately from one day to the next. For instance, on steep slopes, in wine-growing regions, for instance, you can't work very well with mechanical instruments there, which might have been an alternative.
Question? Yeah, please. Wait, the microphone.
I really appreciate what Dr. Schmidt talked about the thousands of Africans and South Asian youth that are looking for jobs and entering the job market every day. And I look at BMZ as a major donor of so many projects in Africa. I just want to know if you have any special projects that are targeting youth in the scenario of knowledge transfer, because we heard from Ms. Kemper that knowledge transfer is one of the ways in which we can move towards sustainability. So could you tell us if you have any programs or if you plan any programs targeting the youth in concern to that?
Yes, we did not target.
Microphone.
Oh. Yeah. I thought it was on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We did not target it over the last 4 years, but in the years to come, now we will target. That is based on our commitment on an agreement we came to within the G20. We launched a youth employment initiative in rural areas. And now we are really committed to, in particular, target the youth. Knowledge transfer is absolutely key here. We invest in education, vocational training, use of ICT in the context of agricultural innovation in a field. And so in the future, we will target that to use in particular as well.
Okay, final question.
I'll just quickly add to this, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
I think this is a narrative with African countries, and I speak here from Africa. We appreciate very much the effort that donors are bringing on board in terms of empowering our youth. But I'm sorry to say this, but I think the primary responsibility of our government is for ourselves to provide for this. And whatever comes from BMZ, from any other donor, should be the icing on the cake. But I think the narrative, I think the conversation must go back to our own government that we need to put our hands in our pocket. Thank you.
Okay, final question.
Ja, Frau Dr. Hendricks,
Ms. Hendricks, a question to you.
Frau Dr. Hendricks, ich wollte Sie fragen,
I would like to
wie Sie planen, in Zukunft die Jugend stärker zu involvieren auf
concerning involving the younger generation, especially at UN summits, because compared to other countries such as the Netherlands, there are very few German youth delegates who can gain access to the UN negotiations. Is that a question? Sorry, is that a question that is related to the GLF? Answer? Yes, I believe it is, because the GLF is one channel for young people to get very strongly involved. And at the GLF, young people are able to plan campaigns and activities, whereas on the UN level, we have very few opportunities to become active. So that is a question I would like to ask. There are a whole range of youth delegates who attend the UN conferences. You may consider their number to be very low. However, we are working closely with youth delegates. The effect of that is, for instance, that in my ministry, the Environment Ministries, there are several young people who have recently graduated from universities who have come to us and successfully applied for a job and are now working for the ministry. And a lot of them are young delegates or former young delegates, and that experience influenced them in terms of their choice of degree. Here at the Global Landscape Forum, we have a lot of students from the International Forestry Students Union, and I met a lot of them in Marrakesh last year. So we can see a great deal of interest from young students of forestry science, and I am delighted that that is the case.
Nick Schader vom Südwestrundfunk. Frau Hendricks, es geht hier sehr viel um eine nachhaltige Welt, steht auch hinter Ihnen, unweit von hier.
We're talking a lot about sustainable world. As you know, very close to Bonn, there's one of the biggest lignite mining regions in the world. How does that go together with a sustainable world from your point of view? Well, in Germany, we need to put ourselves on a track to the phase out of coal. There's no question about that. And at the international level, we have made a commitment to making a contribution to curbing climate change. What does that mean? At the latest, towards the mid-century, we want to live and work in a coal and gas neutral way. And of course, that does not correspond to burning coal for creating power. So that is something that will be on the agenda of the new government going forward.